Hi, good to see you again. Welcome to Block 1, Constructing, Measuring, and Using Geometric Notation. Lesson 2. I'll share my screen. So, in your previous lesson, you learned how to use geometric notation. So, you learned how to use the rules of geometric notation to label geometric figures correctly and even line segments. In today's lesson, you're going to learn how to draw and measure line segments, including geometric figures. So we're building gradually our understanding and learning of how to work with geometry in maths. Remember, before we start, please go and get your set square, your pencil, ruler, and rubber or eraser. So you're going to need these in this lesson. So you can pause the video at this point to go and get your equipment ready to learn and practice. Remember to like the video, to share the video with those you think can benefit, subscribe to the channel, and click on the notification bell so that when new videos are released, you will be notified. Before we start, I would like you to pause the video and answer the retrieval practice questions in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered the retrieval practice questions, here are the answers. So for the first one, you ask, what is the difference between a line and a line segment? Well, what you need to know to keep it really simple is a line is just a line that would go infinitely. But a line segment is a clearly defined finite length. So finite means it's a specific length. So the difference between a line is a line could be infinite, a line segment has a specific length. So we can say line segment KL. Next question 2, you will ask which diagrams show perpendicular lines, line segments. Perpendicular lines are lines that form 90 degrees with each other, and they should have the right angle notation. And the ones we can see here are these two line segments. Next, you will ask which diagram shows an isosceles trapezium. If you remember, when we learned about isosceles triangle, the two sides were equal. So if we have an isosceles trapezium, the two sides, non-parallel sides, have to be equal. So that is the isosceles trapezium. Let's do our new learning for today. If I ask you to draw a line segment 9 centimeter long and label it FG, how do we do this? Step 1, you would label any point F on your paper. Step 2, you would take your ruler and position the ruler position 0 on the point that you've drawn. Next, you will draw 9 centimeter, or you go to 9 centimeter and put a dot there. So you put a dot to know exactly where you did your measurement. Next, you put a cross on that point and label it G. And then the last step, you use a ruler again and you join point F to point G with a straight line using your ruler. So you can pause the video and make sure you do this practice the way I have demonstrated it. Next, if you're asked to measure the length of line segment AB, how do you do this? You position the ruler at 0 at one end of the point A, and you measure the length using your ruler stopping at B. When you do that, you get the length of line segment AB. Let's have a think at some other problem. Here, where Jack says, let's call him Jack, that the length of the line segment PQ is 8 centimeter. What mistake do you think Mo has made? So we call him Mo here. What mistake has he made? Well, notice that PQ is not on the whole length of the line. So remember, our line segments should have a finite length. So we cannot measure beyond where we have been asked to measure. In this case, we have been asked to measure from P to Q. So actually, more is not right. So the correct line is, I think, 6 centimeter. Let's look at another problem. Here, Rosie says you have to line 0 centimeter up with the start of the line segments to be able to measure PQ. And then Dora says, I think we can work out the length without doing that. Well, whom do you think is right? Well, both of them are right, but it's easier to measure your line segment starting with the 0 centimeter mark. But for Dora, using Dora's method, we could simply say, well, to find the length of PQ, we can subtract 5.8 because this looks like 5.8. We can subtract 1 from 5.8. So we're measuring the difference between these positions in our ruler. So both of them are right. It's now time for you to pause the video and answer questions 1 and 2 in 2 minutes. In fact, you can take 4 minutes. This could take a while for you to do. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered questions 1 and 2, here are the answers. For question 1, you were asked to draw and label the line segment. So by now, you should know how to draw and label line segments. So here you would mark a point A. You would position your ruler 0 at that point. You go to the position 5 and you put a dot. You put a cross and you use your ruler to connect both points. And that's how you would do these other ones. Here you were asked to measure these line segments. Okay. You may not have the paper here, but you can pause. You would have paused the video and, checked to measure. It may not be exactly the same because the scale is different on the screen from what is on paper, but you should know how to measure line segments. Okay, let's do some new learning. If you're asked to draw a rectangle WXYZ with side lengths WX equal 4 centimeter and XY equal 5.5 centimeter, how do you do this? Step 1, you would draw a line segment WX. So by now you can see we're building on what we already know. So by now you know how to draw line segment. So you draw line segment WX using the method we've used before. And then you use a ruler to join the points. Next, you would use a set square. This is where we need a set square because remember, for a rectangle, the vertices, we have 90 degrees on 4 parts of the triangle on the vertices. So we'll put a set square there and we draw a little line which will help us complete the other line XY. Now that we have the set square, helps us to define the 90-degree point or the right angle. We can use our ruler to complete the length 5.5. And then we can use set square to complete the other parts of the rectangle. Now, why is this not a concern for us? Is because we know opposite sides of a rectangle are equal. So if you have XY and WX, then the other sides can be completed with the set square. And next, we have to label them. What if you're asked to measure the length of the diagonal WY? How would you do this? To do this, I want you to have a think of these two questions. What do we even mean by diagonal? And how would we measure it? Well, a diagonal is the line that runs from one vertex across to the other end of the other vertex. So here we have the diagonal. So it could be from W to Y. You could have been asked to measure the diagonal X to Z. Now, To measure it, you simply use your ruler, you position at 0 centimeter, and you mark and measure the other point on the ruler. In this case, our diagonal is 6.8 centimeter. It's now time for you to pause the video and answer questions 3 to 5. Pause the video and answer question 3 in 2 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered question 3, here is the answer. So you were asked line segments DE and FG are perpendicular. So you're going to have to use a set square to do that. All right. And then you were asked DE measures 5 centimeter and FG measures 4.3 centimeter. Draw a diagram to represent this information. So you can use a set square to do that. So when you finish, your line would look like this. I'll do it with freehand. So you would have DE, and you could have another line like that. So you could have DE. All right. DE is 5 centimeter. And then you can have, so DE measures 5 centimeter. And then you have, let's rub this off because it's not going to look like that because there are 2 separate line segments. And then you have FG, they are perpendicular. So FG measures 4.3 centimeter. So for me, if I were you, I would put a set square here and use a little line to form my 90-degree point. And then I would extend it because the line does not, FG is a separate line segment from this. So I would then use mark F somewhere here and G somewhere here. So I'll have F here and G here, and make sure I measure a line segment that is exactly 4.3 centimeter. So that would form your 90-degree perpendicular point. So that is what it should look like. All right, pause the video and answer question 4 in 2 minutes. Well, if you've paused the video and answered the question, here is the answer. So here you're asked to prove through measuring that trapezium WXYZ is isosceles. How do we know? The non-parallel sides must be equal. That's how we know they are isosceles. Okay, and you can see the answer there. Pause the video and answer question 5 in 3 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered question 5, here is the answer. So here, the way you would do it is so ABC is a rectangle, so you have side AB. So you mark a point, you label it A, you put your ruler, you measure 3 centimeter. You label it B, you mark a point, you label it B. You use a set square to form a short side to form the 90-degree mark and to draw a little line which you would use to measure BC. So you mark BC, all right, which will be 5 centimeter. And then you use set square to complete the other parts of the rectangle. Okay. All right. You use set square to complete the other parts of the rectangle. All right. And then next you will ask, measure the length of the diagonal BD. So remember you've done BC, so this part has to be D. So BD will be the diagonal that runs from B to D. When you measure it, it should be about 5.8. And then AC would be the same length. Okay. We didn't need to measure AC because something we should know is the diagonals. If we've done it properly, the diagonals should be equal. Okay, let's look at the other part of our lesson. Here, Jack says that 4 to 5th centimeter is the same thing as 4.25 centimeter. Well, we could use a number line to help us because 4 to 5th means the line segment or the number line between 4 and 5 would have been split into 5 equal parts. Remember, the denominator tells us the number of parts we have split things into. So 2/5 actually means 2 out of the 5 parts. So the second interval here. Now, remember what we know about fifths. Fifths split things into 0.2. So 1/5 is 0.2. 1/5 is 0.2. Therefore, 2/5 has to be 2 lots of 0.2, which is 0.4. So in that case, it cannot be 4.25 because 4 to 5th is 4.4. It's now time for you to practice what you've learned. Pause the video and answer question 6 in 2 minutes. If you have paused the video and you've answered question 6, here is the answer. So here you were asked to draw and label the following line segments. So to draw and label them, you simply mark, you're converting these to decimals. So you measuring 4.5 for this one. Okay. You're measuring 5.5. 4.5.2 because no 1/5 is 0.2. And then 3/5, you remember a fifth is 0.2, so 3/5 should be 0.6, so you're measuring 6.6. So drawing the line segment shouldn't be a problem. You simply mark J here and you measure the other point up to K and you connect it with the line. And then here it should be EF. You mark point E, you measure and then mark the other point F. Here you measure point L, you mark point L, and you measure and you mark the other point M, and then you join them with straight lines. Pause the video and answer question 7 in 2 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered question 7, here are the answers. So for question 7, you were asked points A, B, C, and D lie on a straight line. Okay. AB is half the length of BC. The length of CD is equal to the length of AC. AD is 9 centimeter. So the first thing we do is we draw the line 9 centimeter. We draw the line segment 9 centimeter. And then we start to pick different parts of the question to answer it. We say AB is half the length of BC. So AB would have to be half the length of BC. So half of BC, okay, so we know AD is 9 centimeter. And then AB is half of BC. But what do we know about BC? The length of CD is equal to the length of AC. So it means this is halfway, right? So if AC is equal to CD, it means that should be half the line AD. But we've been told that AB is half BC. So AB should be half BC. So which means we need to have a point BC such that half of AB must be equal to half of that. So that's why that is 3 centimeter. Okay. Which means the other part has to be 4.5 centimeter. So it's about using different parts of the questions. You pick them up, you pick the questions in little bits by bits by bits to answer the question. Pause the video and answer question 8 in 2 minutes. Assuming you've paused the video and you've answered question 8, here are the answers. So for question 8, you were asked, Danny thinks line segments AEI will be longer than line segment ABC. Huan thinks line segment AEI will be the same length as line segment ABC. So who do you agree with? We agree with, all right, Donnie. Okay, we agree with Danny. And here we're asked to complete the sentences. DE is equal to GH. So by working this out, you can see DC, all right, DE is equal to GH. All right. So by using these, you can see that these are the answers. That brings us to the end of our lesson. Well done for sticking around and for taking your learning seriously. Until next time, take care of yourself and bye-bye.